The expression on Brenda's face when I calmly told her she was trespassing on my privately owned lake was worth every dollar I later spent on legal fees. Picture this. I was standing on my dock, pointing to the brand new no trespassing signs, while Brenda Hutchinson, self-proclaimed HOA president, turned pale as her pontoon boat engine coughed to a stop. The humid July air reeked of sunscreen and lake water as 20 curious neighbors looked on from shore, watching her realize she'd been harassing the actual landowner for months. But here's the real twist. It wasn't just about boating rights. Brenda had cooked up a plan to slam our community with $2.3 million in bogus assessments by claiming fabricated waterfront privileges. She thought she could roll me easily when I inherited my grandfather's estate. Big mistake. So let me ask, what would you do if your HOA tried to steal your property in front of your guests? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're tuning in from, because I guarantee your HOA has tried some ridiculous stunt too. Anyway, here's how I stumbled headfirst into the most elaborate land grab scheme I've ever seen. My name's Marcus Thornfield, and just half a year ago I was living in Phoenix, freshly divorced, burned out from my engineering career, and questioning every decision I'd made since college, when I got the phone call that changed everything. My grandfather Ezra had passed away and left me his entire lakefront estate in Millbrook, Wisconsin. Now, Ezra wasn't just a property owner. He was basically the unofficial mayor of Crystal Lake. He owned 847 acres with 2.3 miles of pristine shoreline and had been the community's lake guardian for 6 decades. Every summer, he hosted legendary fish fries, taught kids to swim, and lent out boats without ever asking for a dime. I grew up here every summer, learning about water rights while the dock planks groaned under my feet, and the smell of pine mingled with fish guts Uncle Jim was cleaning. The property was incredible. Main house, guest cabins, a boat launch, even the crumbling mill foundation Ezra always swore he'd restore next year. That's when Brenda stormed into my life, a 52-year-old transplant from Minneapolis. Suburbs, strutting around in tennis whites she never played in, driving a white BMW with Community First vanity plates, and wielding a made-up title of Community Standards Director. She showed up a week after I arrived, clipboard in hand and a predatory grin plastered on her face. "We need to revisit your grandfather's informal lake arrangements," she said, standing in my doorway as though she owned the place. Her perfume reeked of money trying to hide something rotten. Out came a 47-page usage agreement demanding $12,000 a year in so-called maintenance fees, claiming there was an implied easement. She practically sneered when she called me an outsider, insisting Grandpa had been very cooperative with the community. I declined politely, saying I needed to review the paperwork, and her smile turned ice cold. A week later, I hosted a small barbecue with college friends, burgers on the grill, music playing, just trying to revive those old family traditions, until Brenda showed up at 2 p.m. with laminated violation notices. She demanded a guest list like she was Border Patrol, declaring the community had standards. The tension was so thick my guests packed up early, party ruined. Feeling like I'd let Grandpa down, I retreated to his study that night and stumbled on a hidden panel behind a bookcase. Inside a cedar chest lay original deeds, surveyor maps, and water rights documents dating back to the 1920s. One in particular made me grin, the 1923 Crystal Lake Water Rights Grant, notarized and filed with the county, giving my family exclusive ownership of the entire lake. My engineering brain knew one thing: courthouse records don't lie. Brenda was bluffing with smoke and mirrors. Turns out she wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was running a scam. The very next morning I found a fake cease and desist letter, tucked under my windshield wiper, complete with phony letterhead from something called Community Legal Services. It threatened $500 daily fines for using association-owned waterfront. Problem is, no real law firm operates with a P.O. box and made-up names. I knew it was bogus. That made me curious, so I started asking around. Dorothy Kowalski, My 78-year-old neighbor told me over strong coffee and cinnamon rolls that Ezra never charged anyone for lake access in 60 years. Jim Brennan, retired teacher 3 houses down, revealed Brenda had been collecting $200 per month from 23 families, nearly $5,000 monthly, for over 2 years. Families like the Hendersons were paying $2,400 a year just so their kids could swim in water they thought was community property. I headed to the county courthouse where Clerk Sandra helped me dig through decades of dusty records. The truth was crystal clear. No HOA had ever been legally registered for Millbrook Shores. Brenda's own deed showed no water rights whatsoever. And Ezra's 1963 survey proved our family owned the entire shoreline outright. I was still feeling triumphant when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door days later. He claimed Brenda had accused me of harassment and vandalism. I laughed, showed him the original deeds spread across my kitchen table, and watched his expression flip as he realized the so-called victim was the trespasser. Together we drove to Brenda's house, where she was smugly watering her flowers in full tennis gear, totally unaware her entire con was about to collapse. Brenda's confident smirk dissolved quicker than butter on a skillet when Deputy Carson began gently laying out the fundamentals of property law. "Ma'am, looks like there's been some misunderstanding about ownership rights here," he said with the kind of patience only small-town deputies perfect. Brenda's watering hose clattered against the pavement, spraying chaotically, while the earthy scent of mulch and fertilizer mixed with her sudden panic. "The neighborhood has always had shared lake access," she insisted desperately. I kept my tone calm but firm. "You're right, Brenda. My family did share it openly for generations. But demanding money for land you don't own isn't sharing. It's stealing." Within days, the story spread like wildfire across Millbrook. 3 households stopped handing Brenda their bogus monthly fees almost immediately. The local hardware store owner brought up the lake fight to every single customer, and Jim Brennan, bless his retired teacher heart, offered to help me comb through Wisconsin statutes on HOA formation. Still, Brenda wasn't giving up. By Friday, I found a final notice taped to my front door, complete with ridiculous claims that my grandfather had entered into some mystical verbal covenant witnessed by community elders. She threatened to sue me for breach of covenant, a neat trick considering no covenant actually existed. That's when it clicked. Polite corrections weren't going to work. Brenda was doubling down, inventing new lies daily, and I needed to prepare for escalation. Tuesday morning brought her boldest stunt yet, a slickly designed flyer in my mailbox advertising a community meeting that Thursday evening at 7 p.m. The subject, Waterfront Access Rights and Safety Concerns. It listed her as president of the Millbrook Shores HOA, complete with laughably padded credentials. The kicker? 34 families received flyers. Mine somehow got lost in the shuffle. Luckily, Dorothy called me, rolling her eyes through. The receiver, as she explained, Brenda had been spinning door-to-door yarns about me fencing off the entire shoreline. According to her, I was an arrogant out-of-stater who didn't understand local traditions. Jim Brennan added more gossip. Brenda was telling newcomers I planned to ban kids from swimming and even charge admission fees. The rumor campaign was working. At the grocery store, the Hendersons' 8-year-old tugged my sleeve and, on the verge of tears, asked if I was really going to keep children out of the lake. That nearly broke me. It was obvious Brenda had escalated into psychological warfare and was willing to use children as pawns, so I launched my own investigation. At the Millbrook Township office, a sharp-eyed clerk confirmed Brenda had never filed any permit for a public meeting, had 0 legal HOA registration, and carried no insurance. Basically, everything she was doing could land her in hot water with the state attorney general. The musty air reeked of overbrewed coffee and toner as she handed me surrounding property. Records. That's when the truth hit me. 3 neighboring families also owned shoreline sections in their deeds, meaning Brenda had conned people who didn't even need her permission to touch the lake. Thursday night, I marched straight into Tse, her meeting. The community center was jam-packed, over 40 residents wedged onto folding chairs, stale donuts, and scorched coffee set out on card tables, while Brenda played CEO at the front with a PowerPoint presentation. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, amplifying the tension. She clicked through slides of dangerous overcrowding, actually just snapshots of my barbecue, and painted dire warnings about lawsuits and plummeting property values. Without professional management, she said gravely, one accident could bankrupt us all. I held my tongue until she wrapped up her 20-minute scare show, then stood during Q&A. Mrs. Hutchinson, fascinating talk, I said, voice carrying. Could you clarify which legal authority actually grants you management rights over this lake? You could have heard a mosquito blink. Brenda's complexion shifted through a rainbow of panic before she blurted about verbal agreements and community traditions. That's when I opened my folder and began passing courthouse-certified copies of the original 1923 water rights grant down the rows. The crinkle of paper filled the room like autumn leaves rustling. These documents show my family has owned the entire lake for nearly a century, I announced. And by the way, 3 other families here own their own shoreline parcels too. None of us gave anyone else management authority. Murmurs erupted, growing like distant thunder as neighbors began scrolling through deeds on their phones. Brenda tried pivoting, claiming historical documents were outdated and insisting modern community standards overruled them. But then she slipped, bragging that she'd already deposited $8,200 into a community account for maintenance. I smiled sweetly. So, you admit you've been collecting funds for a lake you neither own nor control? That broke the dam. The Hendersons jumped up, demanding answers. Jim Brennan shook his head in disbelief. Dorothy's voice cut through. The chaos. Ezra Thornfield never charged a soul in 60 years. Brenda slammed her laptop shut, muttered about legal counsel, and bolted for the exit. The room erupted into a storm of confusion as at least a dozen families rushed over to ask me about refunds. Sarah Chen, who ran the local diner, immediately volunteered to host a real meeting grounded in facts rather than fiction. Others began, murmuring about Brenda sneaking around photographing properties for insurance files, which sounded just as fabricated as her HOA presidency. The following morning, things escalated yet again. I discovered surveyor stakes hammered into my soil, neon ribbons flapping in the breeze like a gaudy warning. A quick call to county planning revealed someone had filed preliminary inquiries about carving my shoreline into a public recreation facility. Brenda wasn't just shaking people down anymore. She was plotting a full-blown development grab. She'd gone from petty fraudster to full-scale land pirate. The ambition almost impressed me, almost. That Friday, the mailman dropped off a certified envelope that reeked of corporate theater. The sender? North Shore Development Consultants, a name as phony as Brenda's HOA title. Inside was a preliminary assessment notice dressed in official formatting, claiming my property was under review for a community enhancement project. The letter encouraged me to partner with local stakeholders instead of resisting inevitable development. I nearly spit my coffee across the kitchen when I saw the return address. Same P.O. box as Brenda's earlier fraudulent legal letters. She really thought a new letterhead would fool someone who'd spent his career as an engineer reading technical schematics. It was time for another visit to the county planning office, and what I found sitting in the public records folder nearly floored me. Brenda had officially submitted an application for community lake access improvements, boldly listing herself as the authorized neighborhood representative. The paperwork read less like a modest access plan and more like the blueprint for a lakeside resort. A brand new boat launch, a 40-vehicle parking lot, even a string of rustic cabins scattered along my shoreline. It was all right there in black and white. What really made my blood boil was her list of supposed endorsements. Over 40 resident, Signatures were attached, a glowing stamp of community approval. But I knew half those names from Grandpa's old fishing tournament rosters. Something smelled rotten. So, I started knocking on doors. Dorothy's face when I showed her the form was priceless. "I never signed anything like this," she said, indignant. Turns out she'd been tricked into signing a petition about boating safety after a speedboat nearly flattened the Kowalski's Labrador. Jim Brennan told me a similar story. He thought he was backing a request for more lights around the dock, not a sprawling development. Piece by piece, the scam revealed itself. Brenda had gathered signatures under innocent pretenses, then repurposed them as blanket approval for her scheme. That wasn't just underhanded, that was flat-out fraud. And when wetlands and shorelines are involved, that fraud quickly lands in federal jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Brenda went on the offensive with a PR blitz. The local paper ran a sympathetic piece titled, "Community Seeks Middle Ground on Lake Access Dispute," framing me as some outsider standing in the way of long-held traditions. An anonymous quote painted me as a heartless landowner, while a carefully staged photo showed my no trespassing sign in the foreground with a pair of children gazing wistfully at the water behind it. The message was clear. I was the villain of her little melodrama. Neighbors began dropping by, each one clearly influenced by Brenda's spin. Mrs. Patterson wrung her hands nervously on my porch. "Brenda says you're fencing off the whole lake and planning to charge us like it's an amusement park," she whispered. The most painful visit came from young Tommy Kowalski, who shyly asked if he could earn swimming privileges by helping with chores. The scent of fresh cookies clinging to his jacket made the whole exchange sting even more. Brenda's boldest tactic, though, was spreading the lie that I could legally block emergency boats from launching on my land, even during drownings. She implied I was willing to let people die over a property dispute. The escalation was staggering. Brenda wasn't just a petty schemer anymore. She'd crossed into something darker, manipulative, even sociopathic. Then Sarah Chen mentioned an odd conversation she'd had with Brenda about whether her restaurant could handle a big wave of summer tourists. That triggered my curiosity. I began digging through county files and one afternoon spotted a notebook tucked into Brenda's car. Inside were handwritten revenue projections, $50 for daily boat rentals, $25 per swimmer, $200 fishing permits. This wasn't about community access. It was a blueprint for turning Crystal Lake into her private cash cow. That's when I reached out to professional help. Attorney Rebecca Storm in Madison had a reputation for dismantling HOA scams and property rights. Fraud. Her take was blunt. "She's running a con," Rebecca told me. "Document everything. Don't confront her directly. Let her spin a bigger web until she can't escape." She warned me that if the application advanced, I'd likely be dragged into an expensive legal brawl. Brenda was banking on that, on me folding under the weight of attorney fees. It was intimidation by bureaucracy. The community itself was fracturing. On one side were long-timers like Dorothy, who remembered Grandpa's generosity and believed in protecting the lake. On the other were Brenda's loyalists, convinced I was a selfish newcomer hoarding resources. And in the middle were the weary fence-sitters who just wanted their kids to keep swimming without all this drama. Brenda kept pushing. She filed a township complaint alleging my property was unsafe for swimmers, citing poor lighting, loose dock, boards, no lifeguards. I can still hear the sharp click of her heels echoing in the town hall as she demanded the county step in. One thing was becoming clear. Brenda couldn't stop lying. Each fabrication required a bigger one to prop it up, until her entire empire rested on a teetering pile of falsehoods. Jim advised me to let her keep digging. Dorothy reminded me of Grandpa's favorite saying, "Greed always pulls the mask off in the end." So I baited the trap. Casually, I let slip to neighbors that I might be open to compromises, perhaps even formal access agreements under strict conditions. Within hours, Brenda was buzzing with excitement, thinking I was finally bending. In truth, I was just preparing the ground for what came next. That weekend, I finally turned my attention to Grandpa's cedar chest, the one I'd avoided since his passing. The old combination lock had always stumped me, until I remembered his soft spot for sentimentality. The code wasn't random at all, it was my birthday. When the latch popped open, the smell of old pipe tobacco and cedar filled the room, and inside was a treasure trove. There were decades of correspondence with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, reports, permits, state seals, carefully preserved. And then I found the document that flipped the entire fight on its head. In 1999, Crystal Lake had been officially classified as a protected watershed zone. Grandpa had been named its legal steward. The state had even paid him an annual stipend, $47,000 a year for conservation duties, for over 2 decades. And it didn't stop there. In 2015, Grandpa had set up the Crystal Lake Environmental Trust, naming me as successor beneficiary. Inside sat $340,000 in accumulated funds, plus guaranteed ongoing payments. My hands trembled as I uncovered reports identifying endangered mussels and rare trout species living in those waters. Federal law prohibited construction within 500 feet of the shoreline without impact studies. Brenda's grand resort plan wasn't just misguided, it was blatantly illegal, carrying automatic fines of $50,000 per day. But here was the most delicious irony. The trust already required me to maintain public recreational access, free of charge. All of Brenda's grandstanding about community rights was already locked into law, but without her HOA fees, restrictions, or lies. I called Rebecca immediately, reading her the trust clauses. She laughed in admiration. Your grandfather played chess while the rest of them were playing checkers. Brenda's application will automatically trigger federal review. Once they see she's trying to develop a protected watershed, she'll be investigated for fraud and wire deception. For the first time, I realized I had the upper hand. Not only could I neutralize Brenda's scam, but I could outshine her by using conservation funds to provide real community benefits. Wheelchair-accessible docks, native species education programs, summer ecology camps for kids. Everything Brenda dangled as false promises, I could now deliver legally, sustainably, and free. That night, I sat at Grandpa's desk going through his careful sketches, plans for educational signs, conservation festivals, even sustainable fishing piers. He had been preparing for this future all along. By Monday morning, my path was clear. I wouldn't just expose Brenda's lies. I would dismantle her scheme by replacing it with something genuine, something lasting. She thought she was playing a small-town power game. But she had accidentally set herself against federal law, state conservation contracts, and a legacy my grandfather had built brick by brick. And she was about to learn, some battles aren't just about property lines. Some battles expose who you really are. Some days I felt the ache of missing Grandpa like a dull weight in my chest. But sitting in his old study, surrounded by his files and maps, what I called my legal dynamite, I could almost feel him still guiding me. By Tuesday evening, I had gathered what I jokingly named my war council around his kitchen table. Dorothy had shown up with a plate of fresh snickerdoodles, their cinnamon scent mixing with the gold light coming off the lake through the windows. Across from me sat Jim Brennan, Sarah Chen, and attorney Rebecca Storm, who had driven up from Madison with a leather briefcase stuffed with more legal ammo than anyone could imagine. Let's be clear, Rebecca said, spreading out forms like a general unfolding battle maps. We're not just dismantling a petty scam. We're going to make Marcus the face of community stewardship while Brenda stumbles straight into federal violations. The plan was as elegant as it was devastating, a 3-pronged strategy that tackled her fraud from every angle. The first front was environmental law. Rebecca had already filed a formal notice with the EPA about Brenda's shady development. Applications in a federally protected watershed. That alone triggers federal review, she explained, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Once they see her forged signatures and shady money trail, This turns criminal fast. While the investigators got rolling, I announced free educational programs under the Conservation Trust, guided lake tours, youth fishing workshops, and ecology lessons for local schools. The optics were perfect. Instead of fighting public demands, I was outshining them, tied directly to my grandfather's conservation legacy. The second prong was evidence collection. Jim and Dorothy became my ground team, casually interviewing neighbors about Brenda's so-called petition drives. Since Wisconsin allows single-party recording, they started capturing everything she said. Sarah Chen kept meticulous notes of Brenda's offhand remarks about profitable lake projects, while Rebecca subpoenaed bank account records for the Community Maintenance Fund. The result? A clear trail of electronic transfers moving across state lines, elevating her antics from local mischief to federal wire fraud. The third strike was to provide the very benefits Brenda had promised but could never deliver. I announced the first-ever Crystal Lake Heritage Festival, scheduled for the 4th of July weekend, entirely free and funded by the Trust. We planned fishing lessons for kids, guided boat rides, conservation exhibits, and displays honoring grandpas. 6 decades of stewardship. The contrast was undeniable. Genuine programs backed by real funding versus Brenda's empty threats and power plays. During that week, trust funds went straight into infrastructure upgrades. We hired professionals to restore the dock, installed working safety lights, placed life rings at proper intervals, and even built a wheelchair-accessible fishing pier based on sketches Grandpa had drawn years earlier. Rebecca's paralegals set up a paper trail system so that every encounter with Brenda was logged. Any harassment was witnessed by at least 3 neighbors. Meanwhile, I launched my favorite phase, psychological warfare. I greeted Brenda with exaggerated friendliness every time I saw her. "Beautiful day, Brenda. Can't wait to see you at the festival." My calm demeanor rattled her more than anger ever could. Sarah worked her media magic, reaching out to the local paper that had previously painted me as a troublemaker. This time, the story ran with headlines about an inherited conservation trust bringing free community programs. They printed photos of me surrounded by local kids on the new pier, with quotes from EPA officials praising environmental protections. At the library, Rebecca hosted a packed seminar explaining the difference between a legitimate HOA and a fake one, handing out guides on how to verify registrations and fees. The community was waking up. The bait set itself. I casually let slip that I might pursue formal lake access agreements through the courts. Within hours, word had reached Brenda, who started circling again like she could still bargain her way out, but the hammer came down fast. Within 48 hours of Rebecca's EPA filing, federal investigators sent official notices freezing all development applications tied to Brenda. The case was referred to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. What had started as neighborhood drama was now officially federal. Momentum shifted overnight. Families who had once defended Brenda realized they had been paying for services that were now being delivered, legitimately and for free. Local businesses began offering support for the festival, smelling opportunity in real conservation programs rather than Brenda's shady lake development plans. Volunteers came pouring in, and in the middle of it, I made a discovery that stunned even me. Many environmental protections came with access to state grant funding for improvements. A single phone call to the Department of Natural Resources opened the door to new conservation grants. What had been Grandpa's quiet legacy was turning into a financial engine for the whole community. The trap was set. Federal paperwork was in motion. The town was rallying behind me. And Brenda still thought intimidation might break me. She had no idea the weight of federal law was about to land squarely on her head. Tuesday morning, the township clerk phoned me laughing. The EPA had delivered its official investigation notice. Brenda had stormed into the office, voice echoing down the hall, accusing me of fabricating environmental protections just to block her community project. The clerk's reply was sharp as a knife. "Ma'am, you can't develop a federal watershed without permits. That's not Marcus. It's the law. But Brenda wasn't done escalating. That Wednesday night, I found my dock lights unplugged and one of the life ring stations mysteriously relocated to someone's backyard. Thursday, things got bolder. No swimming signs appeared along my entire shoreline, complete with forged township seals. The fresh lumber and brand new hardware tags told me these weren't cheap. She was sinking real money into harassment. I yanked them out one by one, the clang of my hammer echoing across the lake. Then came the online war. Brenda unleashed a campaign on Facebook, posting doctored photos and rants about the out-of-state millionaire locking locals out of their own lake. She even cropped pictures of me removing her fake signs, claiming I was tearing down legitimate safety notices. Comment threads exploded into shouting matches between neighbors who used to argue only about plowing schedules. And when that didn't work, she went for my jugular, claiming I planned to charge for lake access like it was Disneyland, insisting Grandpa had been coerced into signing trust documents, and spreading whispers about my divorce like it was front-page scandal. The battle, lines were drawn, but for the first time, I wasn't the one cornered. 3 volunteers for the summer festival backed out as soon as Brenda's rumors reached them, and I could see the fracture lines running deeper through the community. Dorothy and Jim had grown so wary they kept their phones recording every time. She approached, slowly building a case file of her contradictions while shielding themselves from her endless lies. Rebecca's paralegal, meanwhile, cataloged everything Brenda spewed online, screenshots of fake posts, printouts of every slanderous comment, assembling a harassment record brick by brick. The thing about people like her, Rebecca observed dryly, is that their panic always makes them sloppy. Friday night proved her right. Brenda herself showed up at my front porch with what she described as a compromise. I was prepared, my phone already recording, as she launched into her sales pitch. "You can't hold out forever against the whole community," she said, nervously tugging at a tennis bracelet. "Why not make some money instead of enemies?" Her words were gold, every sentence sinking her further. She dangled an offer. I could keep the lake house, but she and her group would control the shoreline access. In return, I'd quietly pocket 30% of all collected management fees. With a straight face, she explained, 47 households, $200 a month, over $100,000 each year. Your cut would be $30,000 for literally doing nothing. She leaned in and whispered that the development plan was just a bargaining chip, and that once I signed their agreement, they'd scrap the project. 20 minutes of taped conversation later, she walked away thinking she'd finally named my price. What she had actually delivered was irrefutable evidence of conspiracy, bribery, and confirmation that her grand development plan was smoke and mirrors from the beginning. The effect was immediate. That weekend, federal investigators accelerated their timetable. EPA agents toured the property and stumbled across fake regulatory notices Brenda had scattered around, which Rebecca quickly pointed out was another separate federal offense: impersonating government communications. By Monday, FBI financial crimes specialists were knocking on my door, combing through Brenda's accounts. Because she'd funneled payments electronically across state borders, her fraud now sat squarely in federal territory. As the pressure mounted, the neighborhood itself began tearing apart. Anonymous flyers circulated claiming I had hired federal agents to scare families, an accusation so absurd it bordered on comedy. Dorothy organized a counter-response, releasing a verified timeline of events to shut down rumors, while local businesses started aligning themselves based on whichever side better protected their wallets. Saddest of all were the kids tugging at their parents' sleeves, asking why they couldn't swim anymore. Victims of Brenda's fake warning signs declaring the lake off-limits. Then came outright sabotage. I woke Saturday morning to find the brand-new accessible fishing pier vandalized. Safety rails twisted, deck boards pried loose, and heavy chains strung across the boat launch to block use. The sheriff's deputy filing the report shook his head. "She's crossed a line now," he muttered. I quietly installed motion sensor trail cameras around the property, and within days they caught the jackpot. Sunday night footage of Brenda herself yanking one of my cameras out of a tree, blissfully unaware she was on 3 others while destroying evidence. That, of course, meant obstruction of justice, a felony all by itself. By Monday, she escalated again. I received a certified envelope from something called the Millbrook Community Legal Defense Fund. The document inside was laughable. A poorly formatted letter threatening to sue me for exclusionary practices, supposedly violating civil rights. The letterhead looked like it came off a bargain printer, complete with cheesy clip art scales of justice. But the real kicker? She was soliciting $500 donations from neighbors to fund her bogus lawsuit against me, the monopolist. The letter was signed by someone claiming to be a community legal advocate, except Rebecca's quick bar registry search revealed the man had as much legal standing as a family pet. Meanwhile, FBI agents were gleefully dissecting Brenda's financial trail. They found $14,700 sitting in her main community account collected from 47 families, plus a hidden Lake Development Reserve Fund with another $8,200. Because multiple payments came in from residents in 3 different states, prosecutors now had clear-cut interstate wire fraud. Rebecca filed a sweeping civil suit simultaneously, not just to seek damages, but as a class action to recover fees on behalf of every household conned. The environmental angle added even more bite. Since she'd threatened a protected watershed, federal prosecutors took particular interest. My trail cameras kept producing more evidence, and soon they recorded Brenda with a man creeping around my property at midnight, surveying boundaries, with flashlights like amateur burglars. A background check identified him as a consultant with a record of land fraud across multiple states. Suddenly, the scheme looked far bigger than Brenda alone. She wasn't just freelancing. She was part of a coordinated effort targeting heirs of inherited properties, betting on confusion and inexperience. That week, Brenda convened an emergency meeting at her house, distributing an agenda proposing the township use eminent domain to seize my land. Her rhetoric was pure intimidation. Families who resisted would lose all access permanently, and legal costs would be shared only among the faithful. Rebecca immediately alerted Township Council. The response was blistering. Within a day, the township issued an official notice. No HOA was legally registered, no eminent domain was on the table, and any resident paying into fraudulent funds risked personal liability. Meanwhile, my cameras kept turning up proof she was sneaking on too. Neighbors' lots, photographing shorelines and measuring property lines without consent. She wasn't only after my inheritance, she was shopping for new victims. The FBI quietly collected all the footage for a broader investigation into interstate real estate scams. By midweek, the local paper ran a front-page expose, "Local Woman," accused of lakefront fraud. Photos of her fake signs, forged documents, and phony development plans filled the article. Community response was immediate. 3 families demanded refunds. Others began asking pointed questions about their fees. Then, Wednesday night came the unraveling. Brenda turned up at my house in complete disarray. Her tennis whites were wrinkled, her perfect hair limp, mascara streaked from tears. The sharp, arrogant tone was gone. Instead, desperation poured out, as she admitted she had lost control. "I just wanted to do something for the community," she sobbed, "but it's all gotten away from me." And of course, between the half-apologies, she found ways to blame everyone but herself. "You're tearing apart neighborhood trust," she hissed. "Families counted on me, and you're undoing it all." But her last words hit harder than anything before. She leaned closer, voice sharp as glass. "People are furious about the federal probe, and if you keep stirring the pot, I can't promise you'll be safe." That was the breaking point. I dialed the sheriff without hesitation, and Rebecca filed for a restraining order before nightfall. By morning, the sheriff's office had boosted patrols around my place, briefing deputies about the ongoing federal case and assigning uniformed presence at the upcoming 4th of July festival. They weren't taking chances. Her threat was, logged as credible? The beauty of it all? I got a front-row seat to her empire unraveling. Even her die-hard allies began backing away when they realized just how deep the legal trouble went. Families who'd handed over money for so-called community development fees realized that cash might never come back. Her closest confidants stopped answering her calls, unwilling to get tangled in the fallout. And then came the moment that made everything worth it. Neighbors began showing up at my door. Not with anger this time, but apologies and questions about how they could join the festival. The mood was shifting. We chose to move forward, turning focus toward authentic community building. We kept the festival alive, putting education and stewardship at the heart of it. Professional event planners were hired, security arranged, and local news stations confirmed coverage. To sweeten it, I hinted at a special presentation on the lake's legal standing, knowing it would draw her out like a moth to a flame. She thought she was locked in a land squabble. She had no idea she'd be unmasked in front of federal officials, regional reporters, and 200 of her neighbors who were finally ready to see the truth. When the 4th arrived, it was flawless. The lake glittered like glass under a wide blue sky, barbecue smoke curling through the air before noon. By midday, hundreds of families filled the shoreline, kids squealing as they splashed in the swimming zone while parents admired the clean, professional setup, all funded through Conservation Trust grants. Bright banners whipped in the breeze. Volunteers hustled between booths, and 3 different media crews set up around the pavilion. Music from the high school jazz band drifted across the water while food trucks lined the entry road, together pulling in more than 15 grand in sales. This was what real community looked like. Displays honored Grandpa's 60 years of environmental protection. Wildlife photos, hands-on exhibits, and interactive activities let kids learn about endangered mussels. The freshly finished fishing pier, now wheelchair accessible, brimmed with families. Liability insurance was squared away so everyone could relax and enjoy themselves without a second thought. At 2:30 sharp, right on cue, she stormed in. Striding across the grass in a crisp tennis outfit, clipboard clutched like a weapon, with 3 stragglers trailing awkwardly behind her. Conversations cut short, eyes followed her as she zeroed in on me. The air shifted. "This gathering is illegal and ends now," she barked, loud enough to ripple through the crowd. I smiled. "Mrs. Hutchinson, what a surprise. Lovely day for a festival, isn't it?" No time for pleasantries. She demanded permits, insurance papers, waving a laminated badge that claimed she was some kind of community safety officer. Declaring herself the official HOA president, she announced she was shutting us down. Confused murmurs swept through the crowd, some parents even packing up. Perfect moment to strike. I slid a fat folder into her hands. "Here are the township permits, the liability insurance, and documentation from our certified safety coordinator. All real, all official." She flipped through, her face reddening as her authority unraveled in front of 200 witnesses. "Since you've raised the issue," I added sweetly, "perhaps you'd like to show everyone your credentials?" And that's when she walked, straight into the trap. Out came her certificate, a sloppy forgery claiming HOA registration, laminated like a school project. Phones popped up everywhere. The news crews zoomed in. Her lies were now public record. I stepped to the mic. "Friends, Mrs. Hutchinson questions the legitimacy of this gathering. Let's review who truly has authority over Crystal Lake." On the big screen appeared deeds, EPA documents, trust filings. One by one, I walked through the 1923 water rights, Grandpa's survey work, and our current ownership. The federal agent present, Rodriguez, confirmed it on the spot. Then I turned back to her. For months, you've trespassed and collected money under false pretenses. This property never belonged to your HOA. The crowd erupted, shock, laughter, disbelief. Her face crumbled. And then she snapped, ranting that I'd bribed agents, forged paperwork, and faked the history. In her desperation, she admitted she'd taken $23,000 in community fees. That's when the sheriff's deputy moved in. "Ma'am," he said, "federal agents have a warrant for your arrest." The sound of handcuffs locking echoed like a drumbeat across the silent festival. Wire fraud, mail fraud, forged government documents, obstruction of justice. The charges rattled off as her last allies melted into the crowd, avoiding her like poison ivy. News cameras captured it all. Her downfall broadcast as kids kept playing by the water, completely unaware, a perfect symbol of resilience. I took back the mic. Let's not let one person's lies overshadow this day. We're here to celebrate our lake and our community. The crowd erupted into applause. Within hours, Ras Crystal Lake Festival trended locally. Businesses reported their best July 4th in years. Fraud prevention groups picked up the story nationwide. Justice wasn't just about winning, it was about turning rot into growth. A week later, the dust settled. She pleaded guilty to 3 felonies and agreed to repay $47,000 in restitution to dodge a trial. At a packed town hall meeting, families lined up to receive refunds, plus interest. Dorothy, tears in her eyes, clutched her check. "Your grandfather would be proud," she whispered. "You turned ugliness into beauty." Cleanup followed. Trails restored, the pier finished with safe railings and new security ensuring the lake stayed protected. Rebecca's civil suit won another $75,000 settlement, plus a permanent restraining order and a published apology in the regional paper. Her home sold to cover costs. Her husband left. Even her kids distanced themselves after the viral humiliation. But the true victory? The community rebirth. We formed the Crystal Lake Community Council with real elected reps. Monthly workshops on watershed care filled to capacity. Kids' programs taught ecology and stewardship. The annual festival grew into a regional draw, bringing thousands in revenue to local businesses. Restaurants reported record increases. The tourism board spotlighted us. Grandpa's legacy of stewardship evolved into something living and thriving. Universities opened a research station on the lake, tracking trout recovery, up 40% in the first year. Invasive species cleared. Native plants reestablished. The Attorney General used our case in statewide fraud prevention workshops. Lawmakers even passed new protections inspired by our battle. Soon, Crystal Lake wasn't just a community, it was a national model for conservation. Dorothy became our historian. The high school club adopted water testing, earning scholarships through the new environmental grant I started. This year's festival drew 500 people and raised $12,000 for regional programs. Kids called it the best lake ever. And honestly, that meant more to me than any courtroom win. The trust now has funding to expand, with nearby counties seeking our model. Developers, casinos even, are circling, but we're prepared. Grandpa always said the lake belongs to everyone, and now we're living it. The biggest lesson? The sharpest revenge isn't punishment, it's creation. She thought she'd profit off stolen land. Instead, she sparked a federal case that left the lake more protected, more valued, and more alive than ever. Her greed triggered a chain reaction that ended with protection across 3 states. If that's not irony, I don't know what is. And now I'll leave it to you. What's the wildest stunt your HOA ever tried to pull? Drop it in the comments. I know some of you have stories that make this look tame. And if you love seeing justice land squarely on the greedy and corrupt, hit subscribe. More HOA meltdowns are coming. And trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.